Look at how thick this fish's belly is. That is a nice, chunky, trophy fall smallmouth. Look at, pound for pound, it's no cliche. Smallmouth have to be one of Canada's hardest fighting game fish.
Let's go fishing. People, when you're in the mood, let's go fishing. Well, it's just me and you. Head on down to the fishing hole. Grab your hat, get your pole. Let's go fishing when you're in the mood.
Canadian Sport Fishing is brought to you by Rattle, premium fishing gear crafted from experience. Yamaha, conquer outdoors. Defend Products, eco-friendly protection from biting insects. Dickies, quality workwear since 1922.
You can probably hear that bell in the background. That's a channel marker. It's actually a bar marker out here on Lake Ontario. We've got a beautiful September morning. The temperature was about 10 degrees Celsius this morning. That's why I'm still wearing my gloves. And we're out here in Lake Ontario. We're off the mouth of the Niagara River, and we're targeting trophy smallmouth bass. I had one fish on earlier, and it was about 5 pounds, and I lost it, of course, my first fish. This is my second fish this morning. It's about a 2-pounder. Just gonna hold him up for you. So this is a classic fall pattern where these fish start to feed really heavily. A lot of people don't think about smallmouth bass fishing in Lake Ontario, at least the open lake. You do in the Bay of Quinte and in some of the harbors and so on. But there's a lot of really good reefs and bars that attract smallmouth bass throughout the year in Lake Ontario. And the reefs around the mouth of the Niagara are one of the hot spots. This guy was hooked really well. He wasn't going to get off. Just trying to pop that. So that's a good start. That fish is about 1.5 pounds. He picked up a tube jig, fished along the bottom. So you can see what I've got here. This is a 4-inch tube. It's probably the #1 soft plastic lure to use when you're fishing for smallmouth bass. And what it's done is it's slid up the line because I'm using a Finesse tube jig head. This particular jig head is only a 1/4 ounce. So you can see that it's not perpendicular to the jig, the eye. It's actually forward. We call that a 60-degree angle. And it seems to help when you're going along the bottom, because here on the bars that I'm fishing, there's a lot of rocks, and I'm also dealing with some current and windage. So it kind of helps to get that jig head working on its way up. So I'm just going to slide the jig back inside the tube all the way to the front, right there. So that's the proper way to rig the tube. So when I pull it going along the bottom, you can see that with that angle, it's very easy to get it to crawl up over those rocks. And I'm not using a very big hook. That's a very sharp hook. It's a VMC. And I've got a 12-pound test fluorocarbon leader. So this is actually a Finesse outfit. So I'm using a spinning rod right now, and I'm going to be changing between a bait caster and a spinning. But when the water temperature starts to get colder, using a tube like this, they'll work throughout the year, but especially in the fall when the temperatures start to drop and the smallmouth start to come onto these reefs in high numbers, that's one of the best times to use these tubes. I change colors of my tube. When it comes to using plastic tubes, there's an exception when you use a white tube or a chartreuse tube. But most of the time, you're trying to duplicate the food that the smallmouth are feeding on, and that's either crayfish or gobies along the bottom. So here in Lake Ontario, the water is very clear. It's a little bit nicer smallmouth. You can see even though the water's getting colder, they still have lots of energy to jump. So this tube that I'm using is actually called a Goby Color, and I'll show it to you in just a second here. Now I've been switching between my spinning outfit and my bait casting outfit. This rod is about 7 feet long, and it's an ideal bass rod. The nice thing about the G3 is that you can sit down to grab your fish. And if it's a bigger fish, of course, I use the net. But there's a classic example. That smallmouth is about 3 pounds. And you can see that tube sticking out of his mouth. That's actually the Goby Color. It's made by Trigger X. And he was hooked very nicely just in the roof of the mouth. But one thing I notice when you start to get into September and even October, November, look at how thick this fish's belly is. So he's short. He's a stubby, maybe 16, 17 inches, but he's probably 3.5 pounds. So these smallmouth have been feeding very heavily, primarily on gobies, some bait fish. You can see how nicely that hook came out. Just going to drop him back in the water. Won't take long for him to take away. Now, one thing that I think is really important, especially when you're trying to tell the difference between the bottom and a fish, is using a sensitive rod with a braided line. The outfit that I've got here is the new Concept TI bait caster and the Concept TI rod. Believe it or not, the rod only weighs about 3 ounces. It's light, but it's extremely strong. And the reel weighs a little bit more than that. But when I'm actually drifting and feeling the bottom, I can tell the difference between a goby nipping at my tube or whether it's a smallmouth that's grabbing my tube or just the tube bouncing off rocks. And the rod has enough spine, you can see that it's pretty stiff, so that I can get a really good hook set. And I can't stress enough, when you're fishing for these fish in open water, as soon as you feel one, set the hook hard. And a lot of times when I'm reeling up, I'll set the hook again because you want to get that hook past the barb. And the type of jig hooks that I'm using have very small barbs, which I think is great because the bigger the barb, the harder it is to drive inside the fish. I'm going to see if I can get another one. You know, one thing about these fall smallmouth, man, do they have a lot of energy, especially here in Lake Ontario. I set the hook on this fish and it came flying out of the water about 3 feet. And it feels so good because I've got it on this Concept TI. It's actually a Finesse spinning outfit with one of their new reels. Look at this, beautiful fish, big head shakes. I don't know if he's done yet. You know, if you've hooked a smallmouth well, he should stay on, especially with a single hook. And I can see he's not hooked really well. He's just on the inside of the front jaw. And he's still got lots of jumps left. Oh boy, the hook's almost out. Let's see if he stays on. Come here, I'm gonna try putting my hand underneath. Ah, good. This is what I mean about that hook is almost off. I'll show you here. This is a nice, it's about a 4-pound fish. That hook was through the inside of that first jaw, but look, the way it jumped 2-3 times, it almost dislodged it. So it's just hanging on by very small tissue. I don't know if you can see that. That's all it was on there. So it's very important sometimes, if you have your drag set strong to set the hook, that when you start fighting a good sized smallmouth like this 4-pounder, that you let off on the drag a little bit. So that if it is hookly light, at least there's going to be a little bit of line going out. He's just not going to tear off. But you can see, I was saying earlier, how chunky these fish are. Look, it's like a football. You can throw spiral. Not a gorgeous fish? Prime smallmouth right here from Lake Ontario. I love those bars on the sides of them. Smallmouth, that's the name smallmouth bass. It's going to hold them in the water for 1 second, but they've got so much energy. That is a nice, chunky, trophy fall smallmouth. Look at Canadian fish or what with all those bars. It's going to take my hand away, and this guy's going to take off right to the bottom. There he goes. Now I want to show you this new Concept TI spinning reel because it is amazing. It's like something out of the future. Take a close look, I mean a really close look at this reel. First of all, it's a magnesium body, okay? It's not steel, it's not plastic, it's not graphite, magnesium. Extremely lightweight and extremely strong. And when you couple that with using a braided line, I've got that Suffix 832, the green line that's on there, and I'm using a fluorocarbon leader with that tube. This particular one is called that mud color, so I've been playing around with different colors, changing it up for them, you know, giving them a variety. You've got an outfit that is designed to catch fish, and it comes from the future. Look at this. We've got such a great day on Lake Ontario. You can see how calm the seas are. When we started, it was actually much windier, so it's calmed down quite a bit. One thing I have to stress when you're out here, and I've been out here in the middle of the winter time, you know, fishing for lake trout and some of the other trout species, you have to be very safety minded. So you can see that I'm wearing my PFD, very, very important, because you never know when it blows up out here. There's a current from the mouth of the Niagara River, and the water's cold. Even today, the water's about 67 degrees. So you wouldn't want to be in the water very long, even if you have a personal flotation device. So safety is very important. There's a nice little smallmouth. And you know, this braid makes such a difference. I keep talking about it. I remember in the old days when we were just using monofilament lines, we didn't really have an option for braid. And I remember especially casting crankbaits for smallmouth bass and fishing in tournaments. And so many of the fish would get off once they would be hooked. Today with the braid technology, because there's no stretch in the braided line, it's much easier to hold on to the fish. Now there's a variety of braided lines on the market, but the ones that I have loaded on my reels is the Suffix 832. You can see the one in my right hand is a bright yellow color, and the other one is that green invisible color. It doesn't matter which one you use. On days where it's overcast, it's really nice to have that bright color because you can watch your line in addition to feeling the bottom when you're drifting with tubes. When it's a nice day like today, there's no problem watching the green line. But when it's overcast, it's very hard to see. The special thing about the Suffix 832 is that it has one strand of gore material, and that prevents it from collapsing. So if you've used braided line in the past, and maybe you've had some bad experiences where the braid got very frayed over time, that's probably because it flattened out and it started to get a little bit fuzzy. When that happens, you can lose up to 40% of the line strength in a braided line. So having a line that has one strand of gore weaved through it prevents that from happening, and it remains strong. And you know what? The braided line really helps to hook up on these smallmouth when you're bouncing along the bottom. This is so much fun. I had the pleasure of having my wife out here on Sunday because I did a little bit of pre-fishing, and we were both getting smallmouth up to 5 pounds. We had such a wonderful time. You know, pound for pound, it's no cliche. Smallmouth have to be one of Canada's hardest fighting game fish, especially when you get it on medium or medium light action outfits. And that's what I'm using here. You know, when you're casting hard baits, and I love to throw crankbaits, I use a stiffer rod. But you can see just from the arc in this rod that this one is a medium action. I like the softer tip because when a fish grabs it, especially if I'm trying to have a direct line to the bottom, even if it feels the rod tip, it's not too stiff. So the fish won't let go of the grub. And then of course you've got enough spine when you set the hook. So I just love the feel of this thing. Tell you what, this guy's got lots of energy. He's taking me under the boat. See, we're dealing with wind here because this is open Lake Ontario. We've seen about 3 or 4 boats fishing this area this morning, so I think the word's got out that the fish are starting to school up on the bar. This guy's so thick. If I can land him, I'm going to show you. He's a football. Come on a little closer. See if I get my hand underneath. Sometimes they don't want to open their mouth, so I try to get them underneath. And they're actually like pretty quiet when you do that. Look at. Isn't that a nice smallmouth? I just can't get over it. They're like footballs. And I think it's got to do with, you know, winter coming on in a couple of months, and they have to put weight on because smallmouth bass and largemouth bass become pretty lethargic during the winter months. So I'm just going to slide that tube. See, because I'm using these very small tube jig heads, the tube slides up the line, which I don't mind because I can actually see how the fish is hooked. And you can see this guy, the hook is just through the edge. So it's not really back into the hard part of the roof of the mouth. It just passed this upper jaw. So it's a good hook set. He wasn't going to get off. I'm going to take a quick measurement of him because I've been getting so many fish that are in that 4 or 5 pound range. I'm guessing this guy's about 18 inches. So I'm going to have a peek. And I have this handy dandy tape measure right at the front. Ha! He's 19 and a half. So, you know, this is where when you see so many good sized fish, sometimes you lose sight of how big they actually are. So this guy's over 4 pounds, especially with that chunky belly. Isn't he beautiful? Okay, let's get this guy in the water. I mean, you can appreciate how clear this water is in Lake Ontario. It's almost like fishing in the ocean. Look at, isn't that a gorgeous specimen? Big belly. Look, if I hold him up, look at that belly. Nice pot belly. And he's gonna get his energy back in just a second, and there he goes right down. Now, you know, because the water is so clear, the color of tube that you use is very important. Look, I'm going to show you the top colors, no matter where you fish, for smallmouth bass. And I've also got a white one here. And the white one, I'm just going to make a comment that when smallmouth bass and largemouth bass are feeding on bait fish, this pearl color or white color is really good. But traditionally, when the smallmouth are feeding like they are now, late summer, early fall, and they're going onto the reefs and bars, and they're looking for gobies, and they're looking for crayfish around those rocks, these are the colors that you use right here. The first one is called a jelly color. You can see it right here. It's actually called peanut butter and jelly. One of my favorite sandwiches. So it's a slight shade of brown. Look, the next one is goby. This is the goby one. And then the third one right here is the pumpkin, green pumpkin. That's what I caught the last fish on. But what I've been doing, I've been alternating with these three colors. Now you might say, well, yeah, they kind of all look the same. They're dark. You know what? Some days one color will work. Other ones won't work so well. Some days you can get them on anything. This morning I found that I had to change up colors, and it turned out that this color, the green pumpkin seed, is the best color. The other thing that's important is the size of the tube jig head that you're using. You can't just use a normal jig head like you do with a twister tail. You have to use a jig head that's got a tapered head, no grub barb, and that slides right inside the tube. So if I was to put a round jig head in the tube, it would look a little bit bulky and it wouldn't go through the water as nicely. It wouldn't be as hydrodynamic, okay? So choosing the right color in clear water conditions is crucial for catching smallmouth bass.
Closed captioning of this program is brought to you by MD Marine Insurance. Boat insurance made easy.
You know, it's starting to get into the afternoon, so a lot of the boats have left. Oh, this guy's gonna jump. Oh. He's all rolled up in the line. So it's actually cleared up. At one point there were about 4 or 5 boats fishing this area. And the interesting thing is, the fish would turn on and off. So we've been here most of the day. We started this morning at about 8 o'clock, and it's around 3 o'clock this afternoon. And we actually left the spot at one point to try some of the other areas to see if there were smallmouth that were on. So I've got a feeling on these large bars, they actually move on and off. And sometimes when they're on the bar, they can be quite inactive. So this isn't a monster, but he's a chunky, I'm gonna say 2.5 pounder. See if I can just lift him up in the boat. He's got that front jig in his head, just in his mouth. There. Nice smallmouth. I mean, you could come out here and probably catch these all day long and have a really good opportunity of getting some fish in the 5+ range. You can see that sun's starting to get a little bit goldier. I mean, even these small guys hit so well and fight so hard. Just gonna get him back. Now, you know, an alternative to using the tubes is a drop shot rig. And the nice thing about a drop shot rig is that you don't have to cast and retrieve it. I mean, you can make short casts, but it's designed to be fished vertically underneath you, kind of like we're doing now, dragging these tubes. And because there's no jig head or no weight above where the hook is, when a bass comes in, it tends to inhale it. So you get really good hookups. And you can see that I've got a size number 2 hook on there. That's a pretty big hook. So maybe a little bit later, if I see that the bait fish are down closer to the bottom, I may try going to a drop shot rig. But right now I'm going to stick to the tubes because they've been producing very well. This is amazing, you know. It's starting to get late and we were heading back to go to the boat launch, and I wanted to try a couple of spots that I've done well in the past. And I just dropped my tube down, and look at, you can see in that clear water, even though it's not bright, that is a chunky smallmouth. And I got a feeling he inhaled that tube. I don't see it sticking out of his mouth. So man, did he want it. You know, and I'm using this Shift outfit. This is a little bit heavier than some of the rods I was using earlier. This is what the guys use for tournament fishing. So it's made by Rattle. It's the actual rod and reel with 20-pound braid, and then that fluorocarbon leader. Yeah, that guy inhaled it. Oh, he just regurgitated a little fish. I can see it floating on the surface there. Look at the size of this smallmouth. This is nice, nice fish. Come on. I'm gonna try not using the net and see if I can got him. Gotta show you this fish. It's not a nice Lake Ontario smallmouth. That's a slab. You think he wanted that tube? It's down there. You know, good thing I've got the pliers beside me. Isn't that a gorgeous fish? You can see why they call them bronzeback. They've got that gorgeous color, bronze color. This guy hooked in the roof of the mouth, and I don't think I'm gonna hurt him at all. So I gotta it's just in the tissue. There, got that tube out. But that is such a fine specimen. Isn't that a gorgeous fish? What a beautiful way, you know, to finish off the evening before we pull the boats out. So I'm just gonna get him in the water. And you know what, let's take a measurement, because that's a good fish. Yes, just over 19 inches. That's beautiful. Okay. I'm gonna be very polite and be gentle with him. Look at him. Man, did he want that tube. Man. There he goes.
Canadian Sport Fishing is brought to you by Suffix. Always use the best line. Yamaha. Conquer Outdoors. Defend Products. Eco-friendly protection from biting insects. Dickies. Quality workwear since 1922.
I want to tell you about some of the tube jig heads that have rattles inside. Can you hear that rattling? This is a glass rattle. You can get them in plastic, and it's molded right into the tube jig head. So all you do is insert it in. I like this one because it's got a low profile. You work it all the way so that the eye of the hook sticks out, and if you have a bend in it, you want to take it out. So what I do is actually take the tube and rip it. So I want to rip it with the hook. I want to put a tear in it. So what I've done is I've actually split it. See where I've split it a little bit there? Because I want this tube to be straight.